Good morning. I'd like to reconvene the governor's budget hearing. And the first one out of the dock is Secretary of State, and I'd like to invite the Secretary of State up for his budget testimony. Good morning.
David Scanlon, Secretary of State, and with me, I'm Secretary of State David Scanlon, and with me is Deputy Secretary Aaron Hennessy. Excuse me. The budget that we are proposing is straightforward. It follows the guidelines set forth by the governor. It does include 5 new positions. 2 of them are related to information technology, and 3 are clerical. Really no other initiatives that are new in the budget. We do have an election, presidential primary coming up in FY 24. That election is typically funded in a budget footnote, and I understand those are going to be addressed later, but we want to make sure that we have the funds available to conduct that election. I really don't have anything to add to that other than to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you. Over the last month now, or close to a month, the state has undergone a number of well-publicized recounts. How are those accounted for in the budget? And maybe I could say, like, how expensive is a typical recount to your office? And then how is that accounted for in the budget when you have recounts that maybe are above and beyond your expectations?
The recounts are paid for out of the elections portion of our budget. Excuse me, the candidates that request a recount pay a fee based on how close the race was. If it was a very close race, the fee is nominal and the state basically picks up the cost. And then depending on the percentage, the fee gets progressively higher. Excuse me. If the difference between winning and losing is more than 3%, then the candidate has to agree to pay for the cost of the recount. That cost involves picking up the ballots from the various municipalities for the district that is being recounted, and then hiring, and then hiring the teams, the counting teams necessary to conduct a recount. And we have a pool of probably 30 counters that we use through the course of the election. This year has been a record, and we're still in the final recount, so we're close to a month after the election, and we're still recounting ballots, so the cost of the recounts is going to be higher than it typically is.
Okay, thank you. This year, I believe you have a total of 80 funded positions. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, of those 80 positions, how many are currently staffed, or which, in other words, what's your vacancy rate?
Do you want to address that? We have roughly 7 vacant positions. 4 of those are, excuse me, IT. We have been trying to fill those, and we're having the same struggles like every other agency in terms of trying to find people to apply for the positions and take the job.
Okay, and the new positions, what's the basis for those? What's their job responsibilities going to be?
Excuse me. The Secretary of State is one of the few agencies that has an independent information technology division. We have that because of the importance of making sure that our elections primarily are independent from any other agency, and that we control those databases. And so we own the responsibility for that. The positions that we are trying to fill are top leadership positions. They're management and database related.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers my questions. Thank you very much.
You had mentioned that normally there's a budget footnote that's included for in regards to the primary. Can you just talk a little bit about what that is and what the dollar amount, if there is one that's in that footnote, of how much?
I'm going to ask Paul if she can give me that number.
It's $900,000, and it's for conducting the presidential, the state primary, and the general, and to fund the election, Bud's position, the attorney.
The amount is $900,000, and that funds the presidential primary and a legal position that we have for the elections within the Department of State.
Is that legal position currently funded? I mean, sorry, currently filled?
It's currently filled and funded, and the occupant is Bud Fitch.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Normally, we would say thank you very much for your testimony, but you're still on the dock. We're going to switch now to the right to know ombudsman. Obviously, it is a new position, which I don't believe has been filled yet in a new office, but we'll now take your testimony on that.
Do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Sure. So just for background, if you're not aware, this was a legislative position that was created in the last term, and it was attached to the Secretary of State's office. My understanding is that the governor and council and the governor have not approved or found the person for this position yet, but once this position is filled by the governor and governor and council, the person will be located somewhere within our office and attached to us. And do you want me to go over what the budget is for that?
Yes, please.
So it's one position. And the total estimated funding for this position is $129,217. And that's in 24, and $136,797 in 25.
And the source of payment is general fund revenues?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Boxing and Wrestling Commission. Invite you now to take for your testimony.
Hi, good morning.
morning.
Boxing and Wrestling Commission is attached to the Secretary of State's Department. We provide them with the just administrative clerical support that they need. Bobby Stevens, who's the chair of the commission, regrets he can't be here today. He's away. Their budget is strictly an efficiency budget from this current budget year. Their expenses are really mostly only per diems for the board members to attend the events. Mileage for that, and a small stipend for them to attend the yearly meeting of the National Committee.
Okay.
And their budgets are around roughly $7,000 in each fiscal year.
For the first time in 3 days, I don't have a question.
That's good because I don't know much about boxing itself. So. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Now I'd like to invite the Judicial Council for their budget testimony. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm sorry, is this on?
That is on.
Okay.
If the red light's on, you're good.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Blodgett, Executive Director of the Judicial Council, and I am here with Richard Samperl, who I anticipate will shortly be appointed as the Acting Executive Director of the Judicial Council. My last official day with the council is tomorrow, and that has nothing to do with the budget process. It just worked out that way. But I wanted to make sure that you all had a chance to meet Richard face to face. And I expect that he will be nominated in the next couple of days. Appointed. So we are in front of you today with the most significant increase in the history of the Judicial Council. And this is necessary to address the ongoing indigent defense crisis. The vast majority of our additional prioritized need, which is a little over $14.5 million, is to fund court-appointed representation. We are grateful for Governor Sununu and the legislature's support of indigent defense needs during this biennium. We have had a lot of help from allies across the state as we deal with what is really an unprecedented issue facing our system. As you know, the council is charged with overseeing the quality and the cost effectiveness of indigent defense, and those are duties that are taken very seriously by the council and its members. That is reflected, I think, in our past budget requests. This is not an agency that routinely asks for significant increases in its appropriation. But we are here to do that now. We are at a crossroads for indigent defense. I want to be clear that funding alone will not solve these issues, but without it, I do not see a path forward for our criminal justice system. The state's funding for indigent defense fulfills the constitutional requirement to provide criminal representation to those who cannot afford it. The public defender is the backbone of our indigent defense program, and our additional prioritized need request for this program is just north of $3 million. I want to give you a little bit of history about the public defender. In a typical year, this program handles 85% of the indigent defense caseload. We have a group of private attorneys who have contracts with the Judicial Council to take a certain number of cases for a flat fee. And those lawyers routinely accept 14% of the caseload. We also have a pool of private attorneys who take cases. They are reimbursed on an hourly basis, and they, in the past, have accounted for 1% of the indigent defense caseload. And those numbers are really critical to the success of the indigent defense program. In fiscal 22, for a variety of reasons, the public defender was only able to handle 80% of the caseload. Now that's only a decrease of 5%, but it almost broke the indigent defense program that we have here. High staff turnover and case backlogs created a perfect storm for the public defender program. Fewer cases resolved during the pandemic, leading to overwhelming caseloads. Many lawyers were carrying more than 100 cases. And I would like to just point your attention to page 1 of our handout. Hopefully you got a beautiful color copy. And I think that this really illustrates where we are right now in terms of the knowledge base at the public defender. We still have a lot of experienced, qualified lawyers on that program. But since the pandemic started, you can see that we lost a little less than 50 attorneys at the public defender office. And you can see in the second column the combined years of experience that those attorneys represent. That's 443 years of experience with the public defender program. The program during that same period of time has been able to recruit and hire 55 lawyers. The vast majority of those lawyers came in with no experience. And so you can see in that final column what the combined experience gained from those hires has been. And I think that that really highlights our current struggle right now. I think it's fairly obvious that new lawyers or new members of any profession are just not as efficient. They don't understand the system as well. There's a very steep learning curve for new public defenders. And the public defender invests significantly in the training of new lawyers, but it is going to take at least a few years for these brand new lawyers to be up and running at the level of some of the folks who have departed the program. This shift in experience has coincided with increasingly complex cases. And the second page of our handout is an illustration of the data requirements for discovery. And you can see we're showing you per office breakdown. And since 2018, the terabyte size of discovery coming into the public defender has increased dramatically. And not only does that mean costs for IT and support for IT, but it means that these cases take much longer to resolve. We have attorneys who now have to look at dash cam video footage, and everybody, it seems as if everybody has a Ring camera up, and so there's so much more evidence, potential exculpatory evidence that has to be combed through. And so a case that might have taken 12 hours to resolve 5 years ago could now take upwards of 40 hours just because of the amount of evidence that needs to be reviewed by counsel. So there's been a seismic shift in the experience level of the staff attorneys. Clients are presenting with more challenging issues. I think it has become increasingly clear that during the pandemic, many New Hampshire residents were not getting mental health, substance use treatment, and so the clients are presenting a much more challenging fashion than they had prior to the pandemic. Cases are also taking longer to resolve. And for the first time in its history, the public defender has been forced to put clients on a hold list. The most recent count has 916 cases awaiting appointment of counsel. There's been a recent change in leadership at the public defender. Sarah Rothman, who was the managing attorney of the Manchester office, one of the busiest offices, or probably the busiest office in the state, has taken over as executive director. She is focused on recruitment and retention, and our additional prioritized need reflects these priorities. This appropriation would allow us to continue the 10% increase that was implemented on a temporary basis in April of this year. That was an across-the-board increase in the salaries for all staff. It would also allow the public defender to fund additional steps at the top of the scale. So the original salary scale ended at a step 11. This would allow the public defender to fund steps 12 through 15 in an effort to keep the experienced attorneys in the program. It would also fund an additional 5% increase during the next biennium. And in looking at advertisements for public defender positions in neighboring states, advertisements for positions with prosecutor offices, these salary increases are really necessary to remain competitive and to keep the folks that we have now on board. It would also fund the creation of 8 new IT paralegal positions, which are really critical, especially in light of this high volume discovery cases and the electronic discovery that is now common. And it would also be used to fund IT upgrades. This additional prioritized need is the #1 priority for the Judicial Council. We've had a glimpse over the past couple of years of what will happen if the public defender is not able to keep 85% of its caseload, 85% of the indigent defense caseload, and our system is not built to address that. The Judicial Council has struggled quite a bit over the past year and a half with appointing counsel outside of the public defender program. And we are also in the request for the public defender is on page 14 of the budget book. And that request also includes $4 million for a secondary public defender program. The council has had statutory authority to create another program since the 1980s. This has never had to seriously contemplate this before. But right now, we need another program that will accept every case that is offered to it, absent a conflict or caseload caps. The current indigent defense system is not meeting the need. Attorneys are overwhelmed and they do not want to accept incarcerated clients, juvenile clients, or parole cases. Today, as I sit here, 14 defendants are in jail awaiting appointment of counsel. We have 3 juveniles with upcoming court dates, but no attorney. So we are requesting $4 million to create another public defender program that would be taking conflict cases. It could also help if there's still a hold list at the time that it gets up and running. But the real need is to ensure quick appointment of counsel. Under the current program, we are reaching out to 25 attorneys to find somebody who is willing to accept an incarcerated client. These delays are increasing, and we need to change the program to respond to the need. The RFP will go out in the spring, obviously contingent on appropriate funding through the budget. $4 million is the best estimate that we have for the cost of setting up a firm from scratch, but it's certainly possible that an already existing private firm will put in a proposal for this. But we are looking to focus on Merrimack and Hillsborough County, which have the most cases in the state and where the biggest unmet need is right now. The contract attorney budget is on page 13 of the budget book. We are requesting an additional prioritized need of $600,000 for this program. The contract attorneys are also in crisis. We have lost 9 attorneys since the beginning of fiscal 22, and that equates to about 900 cases. So our contract attorneys are at maximum capacity right now. The fiscal 23 contract included some additional reimbursements to the contract attorneys. We are now providing an administrative fee to address overhead, and we are providing an additional $200 fee for an incarcerated felony case, an additional $100 fee for an incarcerated misdemeanor level case. And the additional prioritized need of $600,000 is to cover those costs. The assigned counsel line is on page 11 of the budget book. And this line pays for the representation of indigent defendants in criminal cases and accused parents in the child protection cases. At the request of the Judicial Council, the Supreme Court increased the reimbursement rate for court-appointed representation. The $60 an hour rate was set in 1992, and it did not increase until October 1st of this year, when it went up to $90 an hour. The reimbursement rate for serious felonies had been $100 an hour, and that rate has increased to $125 an hour. Again, as we've seen that the public defender had to curtail intake of new cases, the contract attorney program got saturated. The assigned counsel, who in the past have only handled 1% of this caseload, that has increased to 6%, and it is an increase of almost 1,000 more cases than in the previous fiscal year. Every one of those cases is assigned by calls, emails, in some cases begging attorneys to take those appointments. And our materials include some articles that discuss the crisis and the efforts that have been made to address it. As you know, the Supreme Court put together a task force led by Justice Donovan. They made a request to private firms across the state to take these cases. We have recruited attorneys from Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, but we still do not have enough lawyers willing to accept these cases. And since the increase, I have heard from attorneys in private practice that this will help them make a case to their partners, that they should be able to take some of these cases, but we're still not reimbursing at a level that is anywhere near equivalent to the private reimbursement rates. The additional prioritized need here is quite steep at $3.6 million. That is to fund the increase in the reimbursement rates. Services other than counsel are on page 15 of the budget book. The counsel only pays for services if a judge has determined that it is necessary for an adequate defense as required by the Constitution. This line includes costs for expert witnesses, transcripts, and interpreters. We almost expended the entire fiscal 23 appropriation for services by the end of this month. Our additional prioritized need is $1.5 million. This also reflects an anticipated significant cost for experts in the YDC cases. I'm sure you've seen some of the headlines about these cases, but the discovery is in excess of 20 million pages. There are 11 co-defendants, and it is a case unlike anything we have ever seen before in this state. And it is going to be, the cost is going to be significant. And now I know that our handouts and most of my presentation today are focused on indigent defense, and that is a topic that we have talked about quite a lot over the past several months. But the Judicial Council also funds other programs, and we pay for the private guardians ad litem and the attorneys appointed to represent parents in the child protection world. And the Judicial Council also contracts with CASA. As I'm sure most of you know, CASA is the preferred provider of guardian ad litem services in child protection cases. Their volunteer advocates receive extensive training and supervision. The state's investment is a public-private partnership, and it funds a relationship with abused or neglected children that is just not possible under the private reimbursement model. In fiscal 22, CASA advocates spent over 89,000 hours on their cases. They drove over 460,000 miles, and they had more than 15,000 visits with their children. Under the new reimbursement rates of $90 an hour, that time commitment alone would cost the state over $8 million. The cases coming to CASA and the children coming to CASA have become increasingly complex. During the pandemic, reports of suspected abuse and neglect were delayed when children were not in school and not being seen by other people in the community. Once those reports were made, there is a delay in the services because of the workforce shortage that we're all facing. And so CASA is working with children who have levels of trauma that are really unbelievable. In fiscal 19, CASA worked with 52 children who had lost a parent. In fiscal 22, that number increased to 108 children who had lost a parent. In the past year, CASA spent an average of 262 hours per case and had 44 visits with the children involved. Because of the increased complexity, CASA's small legal staff has had to be involved in more and more of these cases. They're now working in almost a third of all child protection cases coming into CASA. We are requesting a $200,000 increase This funding would be used to address the workforce shortage, increased need for legal staffing, and the continued recruitment and retention of the volunteers that help CASA function. Our budget line 1101 is for the non-CASA guardians ad litem. Again, they are assigned when CASA is unavailable, but CASA bends over backwards to make their advocates available. And on numerous occasions, judges will reach out and say, this case needs a CASA. And Marty and her group always step up and make that happen. For the cases where CASA is unavailable and there has not been a request, private guardians step up and fill that need. Our additional prioritized need of $250,000 is a reflection of the increase in the reimbursement rate from $60 to $90. The Guardian Ad Litem Fund, which is 1092, it also covers the cost of private guardians ad litem in the termination of parental rights cases. That follows a child protection case where the parent has not been able to correct. Pay for attorneys on guardianship of minor and incapacitated adults out of this line. And I think it's important to also note that there's recent legislation that authorizes the Judicial Council to pay for the services other than counsel on these cases, and we expect that that will increase our costs as well. As I think most of you are aware, the Judicial Council serves as the pass-through for the state's commitment to the civil legal needs of indigent residents through an appropriation to New Hampshire legal assistance. Our additional prioritized need of $750,000 for this program would focus on New Hampshire Legal Assistance's Domestic Violence Advocacy Project. The Domestic Violence Advocacy Project was founded over 20 years ago to provide civil legal aid to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. NHLA attorneys represent survivors in protective order hearings and related family law matters. These staff members work collaboratively with the staff at the domestic violence crisis centers across the state, and the vast majority of clients at NHLA are referred by the crisis center advocate. Right now, NHLA attorneys represent clients across the state. There is not sufficient staffing to accept every case. Their focus is on assisting survivors who are at high risk of lethal violence. The Judicial Branch recently issued a report from its task force on domestic violence cases, and that report noted that less than 15% of survivors have representation at a protective order hearing. NHLA is committed to this crucial work. They've received VOCA grants and VAWA. I'm not sure if that's VAWA, but that's what I apologize for that. They've received funding as well from the Legal Assistance for Victims grant. This additional prioritized need would support between 5 and 6 new staff attorneys who would be solely focused on this work and would significantly increase the representation for survivors at a critical time in their lives. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Or we could go back pre-pandemic and specifically about the Indigent Council. How would you describe, what I'm trying to find out is how much of this is COVID related and how much of this is a long-term problem that needs to be addressed? Prior to, say, in 2019, the early part of 2020, fiscal year 2020, how would you describe the program then compared to now?
Thank you for the question. Prior to the pandemic, we were seeing an increase in the time to disposition for criminal cases. And we actually invited the Sixth Amendment Center here to do an assessment of our indigent defense program. And a large part of that request was to help us determine why cases were taking longer to resolve. And we did not get an answer to that important question. But it does seem that there are a number of factors that have played into that. I think that even before the pandemic, the effects of the opioid crisis were complicating factors that both defense counsel and prosecutors and the courts were dealing with. We also saw some changes in the procedures at the court, the switch to e-filing, and some other changes that made the court system perhaps more efficient, but changed the way the defense counsel was interacting with the cases. And that has, I think, especially by more experienced attorneys, I think that switch was difficult. So we had the opioid crisis, we had some changes to court procedure, and I think that cases had been, the backlog had been creeping up before the pandemic for those reasons. 5, 6, 7 years ago, the public defender had really reached equilibrium in terms of open and closed cases. So if they brought in 27,000 new cases during the course of a year, they were closing roughly the same amount of cases. But that started to shift prior to the pandemic. And so certainly the pandemic, I think, was the final straw, if you will. But looking back, we saw that the pieces were coming into place that would lead to this, where we are right now.
Okay, thank you. In the article in your handout you passed, I believe it was from the Concord Monitor, it states that there were 32 attorneys departed over a 15-month period. And from your other charts, they were very experienced attorneys. I wonder if you could just, if you had anecdotal evidence on why they all left. Did they retire? Did they just fed up with the job? The pay wasn't enough? What was the overriding reasons?
Yeah, I think what we've heard, and I can certainly ask Sarah Rothman to speak in more detail about this, but it's been a combination of factors. The packages available through private practice over the past few years have been exceptionally high, and we lost attorneys to private practice in New Hampshire. We've lost attorneys to public defender programs in other states, especially Massachusetts. CPCS pays attorneys a much higher rate, and it also has a much lower caseload cap. And so it's been hard to keep attorneys who have the opportunity to make more money and have fewer cases, perhaps just south of our border. We also have seen attorneys starting their own private practice. And I think that there has been a level of burnout, not just in this profession, but in many professions since the pandemic. When there were COVID outbreaks in the jails across the state, many attorneys from both the contract and the public defender program had to actually make life or death decisions about whether to go visit a client. If they had underlying health issues, if they lived with a family member who had underlying health issues. So I think that this job has become much more challenging during the course of the pandemic. And overall, we are seeing that fewer and fewer attorneys who come out of law school with significant debt are interested in public sector jobs.
How confident are you that the packages you're proposing here will be sufficient to bring in the attorneys that you desperately need for this program?
That's a very good question. So as you can see, we've lost quite a few experienced public defenders from the program that we have. I have had conversations with a few former public defenders who tell me that they are interested in working with an alternative public defender program. They are folks who have more experience and I think could create a more nimble program of attorneys that are able to take on the serious felonies, incarcerated cases, and perhaps be a model where we don't have the mentoring and the training that happens in the public defender office, but we're really focused on experienced lawyers who can handle a higher volume of more serious cases. So I do think that, the workforce shortage is absolutely a reality, and that has played a significant role in the crisis. But I believe that there are attorneys who are experienced and still committed to indigent defense who may be willing to do this work in a different capacity.
Okay, one last question from me. In the budget, you have significant increases in the public defender program, the contract counsel, and the assigned counsel. Devil's advocate question, do we need to do all three? For example, if we fully funded the public defender program and it worked the way you think it's going to work, can we keep the other two, the assigned counsel and the contract counsel, fairly close to where they are now?
That, I think, is the million-dollar question.
Multi-million dollar.
Yes. Yes. So I think that right now we have the worst situation possible. We have a public defender that cannot take the percentage of cases it used to take. We have a contract attorney program that's not able to take the overflow. And then we have private attorneys who have never been expected or resourced to take the overflow from that. And so I think that in the next biennium, we will have increased costs for all of these programs. But if there is a secondary or alternative public defender program, I think that our reliance on assigned counsel is going to decrease significantly. And it won't happen right away, but we will not have the need to reach out to 20 attorneys for an incarcerated client if we have another firm that is ready, willing, and able to take every case that comes in. So I think I see increased costs during the next biennium, but if we are fully funded, I believe that our assigned counsel costs will decrease dramatically. And the contract attorney program has had natural attrition. It's still a very vital, important part of our indigent defense system, but I do not anticipate that there's going to be any meaningful increase in the lawyers willing to enter into the contract attorney program.
Okay, thank you. I know the Judicial Council has lost a lot of people over the last few years, but the biggest loss they are going to suffer is when you leave. You are their strongest advocate, and you will be missed. Thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
I couldn't agree with that more. I'm going to ask James this question just a little differently, and I have two. One is, if there's limited funding available and we can't fully fund all the prioritized needs, is it better to fund one or two of the projects or proposals that you have in its entirety, or spread out that amount of money a little bit in each area? As example, instead of saying I don't know the exact numbers, but 3 million just to the public defender, $1 million here, 250. If you didn't have a full, could do a full 3 million to public defender and nothing of something else, or is it better to say I'll give them each $500,000? Like, what would work better if you had to choose in terms of those scenarios?
That is a tough question, but what we have seen and what I believe will continue to be true is that the public defender has got to be fully funded. I think I cannot emphasize enough what a crucial role that program plays. And even just a 12-month period of the public defender not being at full capacity has had a devastating effect.
Okay. And then a separate question is, I know that you have the ability to reach into funds not otherwise appropriated when the budget is not sufficient. And the budget of around 30 million that's there, does that, for example, in 22 include those dollars from funds not always appropriated? Or if it doesn't, how much extra had you had to go and ask for?
So I'm not sure if this is, if I'm responding to the question, but our request for all of the budget lines, the assigned counsel, the services, those are our real numbers. Those are the numbers that we expect we will need to get through the next biennium. And so it does not anticipate going back to fiscal, although I know they love it when we do.
Yeah.
But these are numbers to fully fund all of our budget lines.
Do you have any guesstimate or estimate on, in the last fiscal year, what you had to go back to fiscal for?
So the last fiscal year is tricky because we went back for the public defender program, which, is very rare. We received an additional $2.4 million for the public defender program. We had to go back for services other than counsel and assigned counsel. And I will give you the exact numbers. I apologize. I don't have those right here, and I should. But really the biggest unmet need in the appropriation that we received for this biennium is services other than counsel. And we had requested an additional prioritized need of just shy of $500,000 for those expenses. But even that estimate ended up being low. I mean, we'll need about, this year, we'll need almost double the appropriation for services.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to invite Health and Human Services for their testimony.
Be ready to start.
Good morning, Commissioner. Yes, we are.
Good morning. My name is Lori Shibinet. I'm the Commissioner of Health and Human Services. I am joined today by Lori Weaver, Deputy Commissioner, and Nathan White, the CFO of the department. Being said, I am very close to being done with my tenure. I am going to give the lead to both Nathan and Lori for the budget hearing, but I am present to answer questions if I can.
Yeah, thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
Nathan White, Chief Financial Officer of the Department of Health and Human Services, here with you today to present the state fiscal year 24-25 DHHS agency budget request. And we're going to be covering things at a pretty high level. I think I chalked it down about $160 million a minute, given the time frame. So we will be going through things rather quickly. I won't be covering everything, but we will touch on some highlights. So on page 2 of the document they have in front of you, there's a high-level agenda, and we're going to first just kind of touch on mission, vision, or mission responsibilities, caseload, organization, staffing, and then get into the efficiency budget request, as well as some of the prioritized needs. On page 3, you see laid out there the mission of the department, which is to join communities and families in providing an opportunity for citizens to achieve health and independence. And this really comes down to meeting the basic health needs, the basic human needs of our citizens and protecting the most vulnerable. On page 4, there is a high-level overview of some of the responsibilities of DHHS that are statutorily required of us to educate the public and providers on navigating complex systems of care. I think, Medicaid typically comes to mind, Medicaid to schools, things of that nature, as well as the next bullet there, delivery of services to clients. And we do this through our district offices, which are located across the state, where we provide direct services to citizens of New Hampshire. We have contracted community-based organizations. At any point in time, the department may have anywhere from 500 to 800 live and active contracts. Some of those may be with nonprofits within the community. Some of those may be with more of the IT-related contracts to provide direct support to the department to support our systems. There, below that, you'll see the client services call center, where I think, when you think of like New Hampshire Easy or something like that, where we help people get signed up for various benefits. And then below that, there is also direct care. DHHS has a number of direct care facilities: New Hampshire Hospital, Glencliff Home, Hampstead Hospital, and Sununu Youth Services Treatment Center. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Hampstead Hospital and the recent acquisition later on in the presentation. We protect the health and safety of our citizens. The first bullet there, protect children and adults from abuse and neglect. DCY, when you think of that, think of Division of Children, Youth, and Families, Division of Long-Term Supports and Services. We assist with providing housing supports for those who are at risk of becoming homeless or are homeless as well. And then finally, down at the bottom, one thing that we also provide is regulatory oversight for licensing of healthcare facilities, childcare facilities, food services businesses as well. So moving on to slide number 5. This is a very high-level overview of some of the caseloads and the historical caseloads that we have seen in recent years. You'll probably notice 2 major trends on the right with TANF and Aid to the Permanently and Totally Disabled, as well as SNAP. You'll notice a subtle decrease here. What we're seeing there is typically as the economy does better, we do see decreases in those caseload numbers. So if we are potentially predicting some type of recession, we may anticipate some of those to start to increase in subsequent years following any sort of major change in the economic status. And on the left side there, you will also notice beginning in 2020, particularly in the Medicaid realm, you will see an increase. And please note this is as of September 1, this data here. There'll be another slide with more up-to-date data. But what you will see there is you will see that uptick. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about continuous enrollment under the public health emergency and Medicaid unwind. And during that time frame, we have been required to keep individuals on the Medicaid rolls in order to continue to receive an additional 6.2 federal match. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. So moving quickly on to slide 6. So DHHS, if you look at the current operating budget, depending on how you want to split the numbers, we are roughly 45% of the total operating budget. We're 55% of federal general and other funds, and we're about 66% of federal funds for the entire state budget. So I just want to take a minute to go over the overall organization of the department. At the top, you have Commissioner Shibinette. And then moving over to the left side, you have the Deputy Commissioner overseeing information services, our human resources, facilities, the Division of Program Quality Integrity, as well as the Employee Assistance Program, which actually provides services to many other state agencies, not just within the Department of Health and Human Services. And we actually allocate costs to some of those other agencies. You will see that in our budget. Shifting to the right side, we have 3 associate commissioners, Ann Landry, Marissa Henn, and Chris Santinello. And Ann Landry, she oversees the Division of Public Health Services, as well as the Division of Medicaid Services and the Office of Health Equity. Marissa Henn oversees the Division for Children, Youth, and Families, Division for Behavioral Health, and Hampstead Hospital. And finally, Chris Santinello, she oversees the Division of Economic and Housing Supports and the Division of Long-Term Supports and Services. If you shift down towards the bottom, you'll see our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jonathan Ballard. Our CEO of New Hampshire Hospital is Ellen LaPointe, and she has oversight over Glen Cliff Home. You'll see Chief Financial Officer, myself, overseeing the Division of Finance and Procurement. And then finally, our Chief Legal Officer, Melissa St. Cyr, overseeing regulatory and licensing services. So moving on to page 7, we'll move into the staffing conversation here. I think there's a couple of things that will probably immediately jump out. Our Division of Medicaid Services, if you take a look at that, there's 31 positions there. Not all of those are full currently. That team oversees approximately $1.2 billion, which is a pretty significant chunk of our budget. The Division for Children, Youth, and Division for Children, Youth, and Families has a lot of direct care individuals, whether it's at Sununu Youth Services Center, juvenile justice, or child protective service workers. A lot of those individuals are out in the field on a regular basis. We also have New Hampshire Hospital, Glen Cliff Home, and Hampstead are also 24/7 facilities. So you'll see New Hampshire Hospital has almost 700 authorized positions. Now, in contradistinction to that, you'll see Hampstead Hospital Residential Treatment Facility only has 21. Some of you may be aware that we've chosen a different operating model for that particular facility, and that will impact one of our prioritized needs that you'll see in our request. And what we've done there at New Hampshire Hospital, the nurses, the mental health, the social workers, all of those individuals are classified state employees. We've taken a different approach with Hampstead Hospital, where we have 6 members that are unclassified, that are senior executive level overseeing that facility, as well as about 15 classified staff that are looking at, they deal with more of the facilities, the accounts payable, accounts receivable, whereas all of the direct care, the mental health workers, social workers, nurses, those are clinicians, those are all handled by a private contractor currently. If you move on to page 8, we're going to look at some of the historical staffing, and this does feed into some of our prioritized needs requests, and that's why I'm talking to you about it today. So I think the most striking thing here is if you look at 2019, we had a 12.4% vacancy rate. If you look at today's rate, we're right around 21% vacancy, and there's obviously been a number of factors. March of 2020, COVID-19 pandemic hit. We saw a number of folks leave at the outset of that. We were also put under, as was all state agencies at that time, an executive order as a hiring freeze. Now, concurrently, we also had a $30 million back of the budget cut in 2020-21, and then we had a $22.6 million back of the budget cut for the current biennium. The difference being in this biennium, it was a personnel-only related back of the budget cut. So one of the first things that I did when I took over this past spring was send out a listing to every division director saying, you need to hold X number of positions vacant. And what that has done in order to hit that is it's really limited our ability to actually post many of our positions, which just continues to kind of feed into that vacancy rate that we experience. We do have some prioritized needs requests that I'm not going to go into too much detail today on for New Hampshire Hospital to continue enhancements that are current, that were relatively recently approved by GNC, to make those particular positions competitive with the private market. You've probably already heard, and I know this has been a general theme of some of these hearings, some of the challenges that we have had in our hiring, and we are certainly no exception. And it varies from area to facility. So our nurses, we have a much harder time. I think it's roughly 40 some odd % vacancy rate at New Hampshire Hospital. Now, if you contrast that against the private organization that we work with at Hampstead, I think they're at about 80 some odd % filled positions for their nurses. So they have a little bit more flexibility in order to hire that we do not currently have. We also do have a prioritized need for New Hampshire Hospital, asking for additional funding to utilize the statute that was relatively recently approved for New Hampshire Hospital, Glencliff, and other direct care positions in order to provide recruitment and retention bonuses. Now, one other really important thing to understand about some of the challenges that we do have and how that feeds into our overall budget is when we are short-staffed or we do have a significant high number of vacancies or we are required to hold those positions vacant, we do put federal funds at risk, either through audit findings or paybacks or other potential negative consequences, as well as service delivery. So while we may save a certain amount of dollars by holding positions vacant, we do, in the long run, create some potential risks that may be acceptable, but certainly need to be acknowledged. If you move to the next page, page 9, this is the efficiency budget request. This is a high level, and this includes all funds. I think the Division of Medicaid Services certainly jumps out at you. This is certainly one of our higher cost areas. But again, this is the managed care organizations, and the contract is north of $1.2 billion. Another large area is Division of Long-Term Supports and Services. This is what you'll see in those class lines are the dollars for DD, nursing home, MQIP, ProShare. We have one accounting unit alone that's over $300 million in that area. You'll see the prioritized needs request at approximately $3.5 billion in 24 and $3.6 billion in state fiscal year 25. Our prioritized need, we do expect to be able to get that down. When we submitted our agency request when we were working on this about 4 or 5 months ago, we had to make certain assumptions about what we anticipated the various needs in the community to be. We have since worked with those, and we hope to continue to work with James and the governor's office as we go forward to get those figures down. And so I think if you move to the next page, on page 10, that general fund, what you're looking at here is total general funds only. And there are, in our prioritized need, I just want to recognize that we do have about total roughly $20 million of legislative initiatives that were passed related to Medicaid and ambulatory rates and birthing center rates and in and out services, as well as from Senate Bill 444, about $1 million for family resource centers as well. Those are reflected currently in the prioritized needs column. There were a few other things. Our MMIS operating budget was placed into HB2 from this prior session. That's roughly $10 million general funds, 11 in 24, $11 million in state fiscal year 25, 41 million roughly total. We are hoping to get that back into our efficiency budget and get that out of HB2, but that is also reflected in that prioritized need line in front of you. So I will, before we get into prioritized need, on page 11 of the document in front of you, we do have a slide here, and it's this fun concentric circle slide to try to outline some of the complexity of DHHS's budget. I do wish at times it was a little bit more simple, but for better or for worse, it is not. But it is explainable. So on the right, I'd like to start with the cost allocation. So we utilize a cost allocation system at DHHS. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to better leverage federal dollars. And for example, we have executive level leadership positions today that are paid with over 250 various federal sources of funding. And that certainly adds a layer of complexity to our budget. On the left there, we have our budget. We make certain revenue estimates. We make certain predictions for what the needs are. And at the bottom, we have our actual experience. We, of course, need to balance that against the lapse. HHS is typically looked at for the largest portion of the lapse, as my prior comments about the size of our budget. As I made earlier, that certainly makes sense, and that's something that we are constantly keeping an eye on, as well as managing those back of the budget cuts. I think one complexity that we have that many other state agencies may not necessarily have is our direct care organizations. They actually receive patient revenue, and in order to receive patient revenue, we need to be able to have patients come in. In order to receive individuals coming in, we need to have staff, and if we have staffing challenges and we're not able to compensate them enough, then we lose out on that revenue. And so it's this kind of interesting catch-22 relationship there. Between having adequate staff and having additional revenues, which would offset general fund expenditures in those particular areas. So long story short, the key takeaway from this slide is as we move into the upcoming budget discussions, just pointing out the complexity of our budget. On page 12, so let's talk a little bit about our prioritized needs. And honestly, I'm going to cover over $100 million of prioritized needs in the next couple of slides, but given the time, that's what we'll do. So Medicaid continuous enrollment. So we have been, the public health emergency has been in place since 2020. And DHHS has earned an additional 6.2 federal Medicaid assistance percentage. Now, this has been conditioned on continuous enrollment of Medicaid beneficiaries. And we have not known when the public health emergency is going to end. I think this has been a big question. You've probably seen this in the news, and it's come up many times. Now, we've continued to work on making redeterminations every 12 months for the beneficiaries that we do have. But at the bottom there, you will see some of the enrollment trends back in February 2019 through October of this year. Overall, we've seen a 36% increase because those are all the individuals that have come on Medicaid that we have not been able to disenroll in order to continue to receive that 6.22. As of September, last time I ran the numbers, we had received about $332 million of additional FMAP through Medicaid continuous enrollment. Now, the Grand Advantage Expansion Group, this is obviously the highest increase that you see there. We've seen over a roughly 79% increase in growth. On page 13, so there's a couple of little, not quite boxes, but I'll call them boxes. So currently, as of today, the public health emergency is scheduled to end April 11th. If that happens, and that's kind of a big if that happens, we can begin the unwind process on May 1st. We would continue to receive the 6.2 FMAP through June 30th of 2023. We do expect to receive, and this has been stated publicly by the federal government many times, that we will receive 60 days notice, so that puts us right around the beginning of February. Now, if this happens, the FMAP will return to 50-50 for standard Medicaid. It will return to 65% for CHIP. Expansion, I think just one important note, expansion is already at the max FMAP possible. It's already at 90-10, so there'll be no change there. That will just continue as is. Now, we have been working actively on continuing to make sure that we conduct redeterminations on individuals that are currently enrolled. And once the disenrollment process begins, I think it's really important to note that all of these individuals have the opportunity to appeal. In a typical year, we deal with about 1,000 appeals. We don't know how many individuals will appeal. I think that's kind of an X factor, and that will be hard for us to predict. But if an individual does appeal, that would mean that they would continue to receive Medicaid benefits. And that's kind of the big X factor and the unknown that we don't yet necessarily have an answer for. I think that's going to be difficult to predict. On page 14, I get into a couple of the prioritized needs that are directly related to this. You will see in our agency budget request, we put in collectively a $28 million. Now, for the individuals who would continue to be on the program who may not be eligible. Now, that was worst case scenario, and we do hope to, and we hope to get words sooner than later as to when the public health emergency will end. That was assuming it would end in October. We hope it will end earlier than that. I can't make any promises though. But that would cover essentially that shortfall that we would experience in losing the 6.2 FMAP. We also have a prioritized need for a call center to support the eligibility redetermination work. We do expect, as the disenrollment process starts, to have many questions come in, and we would plan for a tier 1 call center. They wouldn't be conducting eligibility, but they would be the individuals that would help steer those individuals towards the correct individual, to use that word again. One other element here that is not necessarily reflected in a prioritized need as of today is we expect the individuals that would be disenrolled from Medicaid to likely be lower acuity. So in the long run, as this process unfolds, the individuals that would continue to be on Medicaid would likely be of a higher acuity nature, and that would cause the actuarially determined rates to potentially increase, which could have an impact. So while we would see, the actual numbers go down, we may potentially see an increase in the per member per month costs that we would experience. If the PHE does end in April, and the disenrollment begins in May, we would likely stagger based on some of the CMS guidance that has been provided of disenrolling 1/9 of the potential population each month. We would target those that we think would be the least likely to appeal, those that we're fairly certain would not continue to qualify for Medicaid first. And that would also set us up for success in subsequent years, so that we wouldn't attempt to disenroll a number of people and then have a number of appeals. And then next year, all the redeterminations would be required at the same time during the following year. So moving on to page 15. So starting with Hampstead Hospital Residential Treatment Center. So the state, and I don't know if this is the first time in New Hampshire history, but first time in recent memory, we acquired Hampstead Hospital. And that acquisition became effective June 8th of 2022. Hampstead Hospital primarily serves youth and young adults with acute psychiatric needs. We are in the process of attempting to open up a psychiatric residential treatment facility as well in calendar year 23. The operating budget that was approved by the fiscal committee, this included approximately $9 million of ARPA funds. We have requested an equivalent amount of general funds for the upcoming biennium in the first year to cover the costs of the existing contract. One challenge here is we don't have a history on what the patient revenues will be. We really only have since June, we really only have several months of actual revenues. So I think it's difficult to predict long-term historically what we expect those to be. Based on some of the information that we've seen coming out, we do potentially expect the second year in state fiscal year 25, where we would be going back out to competitively bid that contract. We do expect some of those contracted costs to increase. I think the report released by the New Hampshire Hospital Association quoted something like 116% increase has been experienced in contracted staffing costs at hospitals. So that's the reason why you do see that year over year, that significant increase there. The forensic facility, as you know, during this past this prior HB2, approximately $30 million was appropriated to the department to build the forensic facility. Roughly $8 million, $8.75 million a year prior was appropriated in HB2. And you recently did see the department come forward to the fiscal committee to transfer some funds in order to address some of the increased construction costs that we have been experiencing due to rampant inflation and the labor market. Currently, we are scheduled to open in state fiscal year 25. We do have a prioritized need in 24 and 25. It's 100% general funds. We researched, we looked, we could not find any potential federal source that we could utilize for this particular facility at this time. It's $19 million in general funds the first year, $24 million in general funds the second year. You're probably thinking, well, why do you need funding the first year prior to it opening? Our intent and our goal was to bring in staff, have them trained and ready to go on day one. There's also dollars included in that first year request in order to hire an external consultant to conduct a national search to try to bring in staff to address some of the challenges that we obviously collectively are experiencing relative to the labor market. The next item there, it is not a traditional prioritized need. It is not in our prioritized need column. Sununu Youth Services Center, their budget today is currently included in HB2. It is not found in HB1. We have requested through the HB2 process approximately $11.4 million of general funds under the assumption that there will be fast-tracked legislation to postpone the current scheduled close of March of 2023 of the facility. There was legislation that was not successful this past session to continue that, and I know that our team has been working closely with some members of the legislature in an attempt to fast-track legislation to ensure that we do have funding for the remainder of state fiscal year 23. And work has begun to design a replacement facility for the Sununu Youth Services Center as of today. On the next page, the next kind of major theme here is rates. The first area is developmental disabilities. We have been working on the term that the new acronym is the DADS rate, the Designated Area Agency Delivery Services. DADS is certainly a little bit easier. And this is to provide direct care services. Historically, the methodology that has been used for the payment model with the area agencies, CMS has found that to be non-compliant. And we have been working over more than a year and a half now, maybe close to 2 years, I believe. We have been working internally with a team and an external consultant to bring that model into compliance. As a result of doing so, we do initially expect approximately $16.2 and $27 million of general fund need in those 2 years. However, that figure is still moving as this work is still in development. The team, just as a side note, has done a phenomenal job. They've been out in the community. I think they've met with over 50 different, they've held over 50 different sessions with community-based providers, other interested parties, and families that are potentially affected by this. The next prioritized need is the choices for independence. This prioritized need is based on our current projections. I think one important thing to remember here is choices for independence. It allows individuals to receive the services in their homes. And nursing home services are an entitlement, whereas this is part of a waiver program. I think that's just really a key distinction. So it's kind of one of those areas where do you spend the money and potentially save money in the long run? And you know, I think that obviously when we're talking $19 million, that is certainly a tricky calculation to make. But I do just want to recognize if individuals aren't receiving services here, the alternative is likely a nursing facility. We did include a $10 million prioritized need for Medicaid to address ongoing required CMS rate increases as well. On page 17, last year with children residential rates, we entered into a new contracting model with the residential treatment facilities, and we took our best educated guess at what those rates should be. We have since looked at those, and we are requesting additional funding in order to modify those. This is another rate that we continue to monitor, and we hope as we get closer to the budget rollout that we can work with the governor's office or the House and Senate to better refine those once we have more accurate data. Again, this is another one of those moving. I don't want to call it a moving target, but it's one of those things 4 months ago is obviously not today, and we have better information today than we did then. We have also included in each state fiscal year $10 million of general funds to support shelter services. The shelter providers today, they incur about $41 per person per day in operating costs. The state, we pay about $8.46 per person per day. This request would get us about up to $20, give or take, to support those shelter services to address many of the ongoing challenges. And I think everybody here has probably seen some of the potential risks there and current homeless situation across the state. And this is really intended to address that. The foster care rate request, this is $3.25 million total over the whole biennium. Currently, the rates that we pay are tied to the low income medium or low household medium income. This would increase that to the medium household income. And the intent there is to incentivize additional individuals and families to participate in the foster care program. Shifting onto page 18, this particular page does not include a prioritized need. It does include, in the table there, you'll see state fiscal year 24 and 25, $11.9 and $11.6 million of prioritized needs for our IT systems. DHHS, as I mentioned before, we are large. We have many different programs, many different divisions. And of course, supporting all of those are over 139 applications. Some of the major systems are listed there on the left side. Our MMIS system, our New Heights eligibility enrollment system. Historically, the next item, Bridges, has been Bridges for DCYF. We've been in the process of migrating this to a new system, Granite Families, and we do have an $11 million capital request to support that particular initiative. I think it's just important just to recognize, and I think this has already been recognized, I've listened to a few of the budget hearings, that automation in the long run, while it may have some initial upfront costs, it may have ongoing costs, it can increase efficiencies across the department as well in order to provide the services that the department is required to provide. On the next page, on page 19, I've pulled out a couple of our IT related prioritized need. I believe we have about 16. Salesforce. This is a system that is used across the department. Collectively, we have a little over $4 million of a prioritized need over the entire biennium, and this is a platform that is used in a variety of ways. It can be customized. We use it currently for the incident management for New Hampshire Hospital. We do intend to expand that out to some of our other facilities and areas as well. Once the work at New Hampshire Hospital is done and the system is ready to be migrated and expanded. This is also used for childcare licensing and training, contact training, and case investigation. The next item is consulting services. So as I mentioned earlier, or many times now, we do have challenges with hiring, and in our information services area, last I checked, I think we were roughly 32% vacancy rate, just because it is difficult and challenging to hire. This would allow us funding in order to hire consulting services as we need them, in order to augment existing systems or build new systems, or leveraging Salesforce in order to create new efficiencies for the department. And then lastly, we have a request for EBI software. This is roughly $1 million over the entire biennium. This software, I think this is a good example. This supports the automated data and privacy reporting and compliance requirements. Prior to this particular software, a lot of this was highly manual and time and staff intensive, which took staff away from other priorities and duties. So that is all that I have today. I obviously covered a lot in a very short amount of time, but I will more than happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, and thank you for your testimony. To the extent that a budget is a financial prioritization of needs, your department does quite a bit. I mean, poverty, homelessness, mental health, child care, child abuse, public health, which includes drug and alcohol abuse, to name a few. And while I imagine this list of priorities would have changed, I mean, maybe a year and a half ago, if I mentioned it, it would have clearly been public health because of the COVID epidemic, maybe. But what are your priorities for what you do? In other words, what are the most pressing needs?
I think right now our most pressing needs is to maintain operations as they are today. You know, if I had to, you can't prioritize one vulnerable population over the other. Like you said, every year there's a different area that is in crisis. Public health was in crisis during COVID, but you know, fortunately for states, most of the COVID response was federally funded, both through public health dollars, through our CARES Act, all of those things. We've been in an ongoing mental health crisis for about a decade now. We have a 10-year mental health plan. There was DCYF crisis a couple of years ago. So it's not that you can pick one area or one vulnerable population over another, but maintaining operations as they are today is our priority. And then our prioritized needs going forward traditionally is either the expansion of those programs, the transformation of some of those programs. But I think what's different about this budget is some of our basic operations to maintain programs are in prioritized needs this biennium. So our prioritized needs, a lot of those dollars actually should be in our efficiency budget. You think of things like Hampstead Hospital. If we don't get that prioritized needs request, we are going to have to reduce beds. So it is really about maintaining where we are today. And then our prioritized needs should be about what's the next step in transforming our systems, both our systems of care and our IT systems, to help us better serve the people of New Hampshire.
Thank you, Commissioner. You mentioned that the vacancy rate, which I believe was just over 20%. How quickly do you believe you're going to be able to fill those positions, assuming they're fully funded? Meaning, have you seen any increase in applications and people coming into state government who want to work for you?
So the 21% is an aggregate across all the department. I think, as Nathan alluded to earlier, for Hampstead, we have seen an uptick. We've seen nurses go up to, say, an 82% vacant filled rate, whereas at New Hampshire Hospital, not so much. And we have different infrastructure and operating systems for sure. So some of it is going to be how much we can rely on other help, i.e. a different model to do that recruitment for us that doesn't necessarily have some of the same constraints that the state system does. That said, we've made great strides, I think, with the Division of Personnel and the money that they've gotten through ARP dollars to help with our recruiting and retention. So we are seeing an uptick, but the challenge is that as soon as you gain, you lose, right? There's constant attrition. So it's really trying to get ahead of that. And as much as a recession isn't a good thing, potentially it does bring more people in the door to do some of the work. So, it's really hard with the crystal ball to figure out the magic formula. But I think we have tools now that we didn't have before. So we're making some smaller steps in towards gains.
Okay. That's something I wanted to touch on, in that the state has enacted and you've enacted a recruitment and retention program for nursing in various areas. And I wonder if you could just briefly touch on whether that program so far has been successful and what you're going to need in the future, not only once this current crisis ends, if it is a current crisis and not an ongoing one, but what sort of resources you would need to attract nurses, meaning that you have two competitions. One, you're competing with private sector, and then you're competing with the overall nationwide shortage of nurses.
Right.
So,
And I think those are real-time challenges. I mean, the bottom line is money, right? So we can only compete to a certain extent, right? We can't pay what the hospitals are paying. We can't do the bonuses like they're doing. We do a bonus, they do two bonuses, right? They may have a better benefits package. What we have is the draw to people to do the work for the department, and that you want to be here because of the mission-driven work that we do. So we do have that, and it does factor into it, but we will always be behind those professions until something shifts in the bigger market. And once that shifts, I think we'll see a difference. But, to get to an 82% fill at Hampstead, that may change in 2 weeks, right? So it's hard to get the stability with that right now.
Okay.
Yeah. And you will see in our prioritized needs request, as I mentioned earlier, the recruitment and retention RSA that was amended to provide New Hampshire Hospital with the ability to utilize bonuses and whatnot. You will see roughly a little over $3 million of a prioritized needs request in order to try to target new nurses and other individuals to come to work for New Hampshire Hospital.
Okay. My last question is going to be on Medicaid, and from general funds, I believe, if I'm looking at it correctly, only it goes from roughly $297 million in 23 up to $346 million in fiscal year 25. And if I understand it correctly, that we will continue to get the 6.22% until June 30th of 23?
June 30th of 23.
Of 23, but then we have to, the people who are currently on the rolls who at that point will be allowed to be disenrolled. How much of these numbers reflect the disenrollment? Is that included here? Have you included any disenrollment, or what percentage of the people you think could be disenrolled are showed up in these numbers?
Right. So the figures for that are included. There's two prioritized needs. One is for CHIP, and one is for standard Medicaid. CHIP is roughly $3 million. Standard Medicaid is $25 million. It assumes the public health emergency ends in October, and that would cover the any of the costs over our other projections. So I would expect if we do get indications that the public health emergency will end in April, then I think it would be appropriate to potentially take a look at what those prioritized needs are and reduce those down. And that would be sufficient to cover essentially those individuals that continue to be enrolled that shouldn't necessarily be enrolled. However, the X factor in all of that is the appeals. We don't know how many we're going to get, but we do expect the entire process to probably take about 9 months. And there has been a team working on that. Just so you both are, everyone is aware, there has been a team working on that process for about over 2 years. They meet every Friday. There's a whole collective crew of individuals involved in that. So the moment we get notice, we are ready to go. Because again, each month that we keep individuals on the roll, that we will incur a cost for that. We will no longer be compensated for that through that 6.2% FMAP.
Okay, and when do we find out if the federal emergency is going to end in April?
At least 60 days in advance. So I guess that would put us somewhere around February 11th or so, maybe February 10th. So about 4 days before the budget is due. Perfect timing, right?
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Good morning. As a follow-up to what James had asked, if those going through the appeal process are found that the appeal is, the disenrollment was correct, I'll say it that way. As you drew the Medicaid during that period of time, is there an opportunity to recoup that Medicaid at all? What happens during that sort of appeal process period?
So any individual that is enrolled during that time frame, the state would be liable for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm going to shift gears just a little bit on the redesign model for the dads, the DDads. Does that model include, and I'm not sure where you stand with this, fully funding all of the clients? Do you have a wait list at all in any of those areas?
So our prioritized needs request includes fully funding that area, yes.
Okay.
Based on current projection, or based on projections as of 4 months ago, and I believe we have provided additional information since then about potentially decreasing those figures as well, and we're going to conduct another analysis here soon to come up with the most accurate data possible. The last when I looked at this back after the budget was submitted, this is the end of September. We would currently, based on updated information, be able to reduce the prioritized needs request by about $26 million, 50/50 federal general funds in 24, and $42 million, 50/50 federal general funds in 25.
Okay. And so those dollars are to fully fund? Is that separate than the?
That is separate.
Okay, from
Yes.
the 16, its numbers are close, but the 16 million and the 27 million on page 16 of the handout that talked about the payment model, that's independent of the.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. But before you go, this seems to be a day of goodbyes. So I just would like to add my sentiments on you, Commissioner. You are the commissioner of the largest and most certainly complicated budget for sure. But it's a state agency, as I said, that does so many things that have major consequences in people's lives. And if that wasn't enough, within weeks of you taking this job, COVID hit. And I think the New Hampshire's excellent record in COVID, in which apparently everyone has an opinion on, and certainly gave it to you, I'm sure, that the record speaks for itself. And there was no better person for the job than you, and you will be greatly missed. Thank you. We'd now like to invite the Department of Labor up for their testimony. Good morning.
Shall I begin?
Absolutely. Please begin.
Good morning, and for the record, I am Ken Merrifield, the Commissioner of the Department of Labor. I'm joined by Deputy Commissioner Rudy Ogden. The department consists of 3 divisions: administration, which includes department-wide activities like human resources, finance, and IT. The inspection division, which is tasked with the enforcement of the state's employment, safety, rather famously elevator and pressure vessel statutes. The largest division is the worker compensation division, which is tasked with monitoring the state's worker compensation system and providing a platform for the resolution of disputes. In each of the last 3 fiscal years, the inspection division has recovered in excess of $1 million in wages for New Hampshire employees, completed typically about 500 labor inspections, completed roughly 10,000 boiler and pressure vessel inspections, and over 5,000 elevator inspections. The division is also proactive, training employers every year on employment law to assist them in compliance matters. As a consequence of the public health crisis that we've all endured in 2020, we've also developed virtual training for employers and plan to continue that, offering that service into the future. The Workers' Compensation Division collects first reports of injury from employers and insurance carriers on the roughly 40,000 workplace injuries that occur each year. It also schedules roughly 1,500 formal hearings per year due to disputes in worker compensation cases, and also manages unappropriated, unbudgeted trust fund collections and payments of nearly $20 million a year, which, if you look at our operating budget, is about double the size of the department as a whole. While the department's total appropriations are funded 100% by agency income, that revenue is derived through 2 distinct sources: the administration fund and the restricted fund. The administration fund is described in RSA 281A59 and comes from a pro rata assessment of the department's annual budget for worker compensation activities levied on the worker compensation insurance carriers and self-insured entities in New Hampshire. You'll note that about 88% of our budget request for 2024, for fiscal 2024, is represented by that administration fund. The restricted fund, however, is described in RSA 273-1B, and it comes from the sum of all other fees, licenses, certificates, and civil penalties that the Department of Labor manages. The balance of the restricted fund, following our expenses, the balance of that fund is transferred to the general fund at the conclusion of each fiscal year. The department has reported record revenues to the general fund in each of the last 2 years, exceeding $2 million in fiscal 21 and $3 million in fiscal 22. And I would say that, you know, there are 2 sides to that coin. Yes, record revenues, but also exceptionally good expense control has led to those record transfers. My understanding is that self-funded agencies were not required to hit the governor's requested expenditure targets. However, the Labor Department has done so in 24 and 25. The governor provided an overall efficiency target of just over $11 million in year 1 for the Labor Department, representing a 3% increase from 23 adjusted authorized. The adjusted year 2 target was slightly higher, about $300,000 higher after allowances for currently filled positions. Again, we met both of those targets with our efficiency budget request. And while we've requested no new positions for 24, 25, despite the abolition of 8 in the current biennium, the governor's targets did allow us to refund all remaining full-time positions in the department. So we are requesting full funding for all of our department full-time positions. Other operational changes that we're requesting in our agency budget include the addition of a Class 103 for operational contracts. We envision this being used for certain building maintenance and repair needs for a total of $75,000 over the course of the biennium. We're also requesting a new board expenses, Class 65, as a companion to House Bill 2 language that we're requesting that would allow us to pay per diem members of a very important administratively attached board that has presented some recruiting and retention problems for us at the department. We also moved our indirect cost payments line into the administration division, and we boosted the amount of money available for employee training due to concerns that we've had about rapid staff turnover. We feel that we need to increase the speed with which our new hires are able to be helpful to us. We have been a very stable department with our staff for many, many years, but in recent years that has changed dramatically. And like a lot of other agencies, we've lost a lot of folks. So we need to bring them up to speed faster. We do have prioritized needs that are being requested. Priority 1 is about $36,000 and is related to administrative services and related to retiree health. Priority 2 is about $100,000 request also from administrative services relative to certain building needs at the Labor Department headquarters, the Spalding Building. And priority 3 is funding in both years of the biennium for roughly $130,000 from the Department of Information Technology due to certain allocated or direct expenses largely associated with technology improvements that we're making at the department. And that concludes my remarks, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you. How many employees do you currently have?
We have 86 full-time positions, and trying to remember, I just ran a query yesterday on the number filled. I think it is roughly 70.
Have these been long-standing open positions?
Those that were longest standing were abolished in the current, so that was 8 positions that were abolished. I would say that the rest of those are more frequent fills, more recent fills.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Can you just talk a little bit again? I missed the 50,000, which was the new contract line. Did you say that was building related?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a perfect example that we're experiencing right now. The security surveillance video system that we have in the department is really aged and not operating. So we have no video surveillance of the building. We want to replace that. And the only place that I can go to, I have no contract lines. The only place that I can go to is equipment or current expense. It seems appropriate for us to have some kind of funding for, and we have the space within Target to create a contract line.
So I was just trying to understand sort of the difference of what that need would be outside of the general services
Sure.
budget that provides some building relief for you. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, actually, I did have one more question. It's actually a line item, which I try not to get into this level of detail here, but I'm going to here. I believe it is the pension benefit health insurance line, and it goes from 260,000 roughly to in fiscal year 22, and it jumped up to 336,000 in 23.
And can you tell me which accounting unit and class?
This is on page 3. This is the overall.
Oh, in the budget book?
Yeah, and it's major operating expenses, and it's fourth one from the bottom.
And I think that's what you pay to admin services in class 64.
Okay, yeah, so these are figures that are provided to us by admin services.
Excuse me. Why did they go up so much?
Do you know the specifics? I know that, and some agencies are charged, let me back up a little bit. The state pays for retiree health insurance. Agencies that have traditionally been, self-funded type agencies get charged their share of what that retiree health insurance is going to be. So those numbers are estimated by the Bureau of Risk and Benefits based on a percentage of employees that have retired.
I wonder too, Commissioner Rockburn, could experience in prior years have an impact on that as well? Because we did have a large number of retirements.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's the answer right there. Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.
Sure. All set? Great, thank you.
I'd like to invite the Department of Business and Economic Affairs.
I said I should play the lottery. I just happened to flip the book open and it went right to your page. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but that was amazing.
If I'm seeing you, it must be Thursday. Good morning.
Good morning. Quick overview.
Excuse me, Commissioner, if you could just turn your microphone on. There we go. Thank you.
Is it on now? Oh, much better. Thank you. As you know, BEA was established in 2017. Since we were last here for a budget biennial process, a lot has changed at the department. We have a distinctly different feel here as a result of COVID and the programs that we've been involved in helping the state recover from the economic impacts of the pandemic, and we continue to do that kind of work. And I think some of the changes and some of the responsibilities that you see reflected in this budget are really as a result of a lot of those initiatives and strategies. So, I mean, with the specific areas that we are seeing this is in some new changes in the way that we operate with our rapid response program and the Office of Workforce Opportunity, working with businesses that are having an unfortunately difficult time weathering the pandemic and the impacts of that, and changing the way that we operate that from a very sort of siloed situation and process that was in place previously to a much more integrated process that involves other agencies, but also involves other divisions within our department, which is creating a good deal of value add in those unfortunate situations and retaining workforce in the state. As we see these changes in different industries. Of course, we have the Office of Broadband Initiatives, which was initiated with ARPA funds, and the Invest New Hampshire housing program. There's, just as an aside, in those two programs, we have a total of 6 9T positions that are operating those two programs. But as you know, sort of in the small agency world that we live within, there is a lot of integrated work that gets done on a policy level between our existing BEA staff and those federally funded operations. So while we're not talking about ARPA obviously here today, but those are impacts that we just integrate into our overall operation. As far as our organization, we're currently at 76 funded positions, 72 classified, 4 unclassified, only 7 unfilled vacant positions. This does not include the BVS numbers, our Bureau of Visitor Services. We do have some part-time positions that exist under that umbrella with the rest areas in the welcome centers. So that puts our vacancy rate right now at just under 10%. With those 7 vacant positions. I would note that for the most part, those vacant positions are vacant because we are in the process of reclassifying them. Those are positions that we expect to get filled at some point in the foreseeable future, some with federal funds and otherwise. But just in terms of our organization, we have 2 primary divisions. We have the Division of Economic Development, and within that division, we have teams that work in business recruitment and expansion. These are the people that work with businesses that are looking to relocate to New Hampshire or locate to New Hampshire or expand in New Hampshire. They've been quite busy, as you might imagine, over the last couple of years. We have our business support and technical assistance staff. These are organizations we commonly refer to as our retention team. These are individuals who are working with businesses that are in New Hampshire and are looking to grow their business in one way or another, or looking for assistance with state government, or just working with our economic development partners in implementation of strategies. They're our primary team as it relates to that. We also have the Office of International Commerce that is responsible for all the international relations that the state has with at least from an economic standpoint, with a lot of Canada, but increasingly a lot of operation and interaction in Europe and in Asia. That office is not entirely, but primarily funded by federal SBA grants under the STEP program. We have our Office of Workforce Opportunity, which is a designated state entity to administer the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the WIOA programs that includes funds that we cooperate with the New Hampshire Employment Security and other outside agencies, CAP agencies, to provide job training and support services to dislocated adult workers, and also to youth programming. We have our Procurement Technical Assistance Center, which is every state has one of these. This is funded by the Department of Defense. It's largely an operation that allows our staff to work with businesses that are looking to do subcontracting work with the federal government, usually in a military standpoint, but increasingly in a much more broad set of instances. And then, of course, we have within DED is also the Invest in H housing team and the broadband team. This is our first full budget with the Office of Planning and Development. This was the planning division that was previously at OSI. Before that, iterations of that became part of the Department of Energy. That staff works primarily in zoning and planning with different communities, and it is a nice mix and a nice addition to our department. We continue to work to integrate that team with our overall operation, with our economic development and travel and tourism team. And then, of course, we have the Division of Travel Tourism Development. This is the tourism division that its primary function is marketing the state as a tourist destination. We have been, over the last several years, on a real mission to see the work that operation does integrate much more closely to our overall strategies of recruiting not just tourists to New Hampshire, but workforce, but businesses, students, and so on, and taking a lot of the baseline work that we do for tourism and hospitality marketing and transferring that into a format that we can use for those other instances as well. And that has shown some good success in some areas. And as a result, the marketing component continues to be a major function and priority for the department. And then lastly, And I always say lastly, one of these days I'll start with the Bureau of Visitor Services because they are a big part of our operation. They are our only operational function within BEA. We are under an MOU with the New Hampshire Department of Transportation to manage the 12 welcome centers and safety rest areas around the state. That has, I will be honest, been one of our more challenging components over the last year, just because when we did scale back during COVID, it's been really hard to get that operation back to where it was before COVID in terms of staffing. These are not very well paid positions as a general rule. Before COVID, we were operating just within BVS with a staff of around 77 individuals. A little bit of about 2/3 of those were part-time. We're down, I think now around 38 or 39 employees, and the majority of those are full-time employees, as it turns out right at this point. We've been juggling operations. We used to be open 7 days a week, 7 days a week in every one of the 12 welcome centers. At this point, we have the main welcome centers on the border. Those are open. The southern ones are open 24 hours. But some of the others are really difficult to manage because we just don't have the staff. We've explored, because everyone always asks me, the relationship with like local chambers and other things to do there. But there are some restrictions to what we can do with that regard, and we haven't had a lot of success in recruiting a chamber to help with that, staffing those centers to this point. And that's not for a lack of trying. I would say lastly, just a couple of the priorities that we have. I mentioned the marketing. We want to continue to obviously make that a focus of the work that we do at the department and transfer that into all the other forums that I had mentioned. But at the same time, our Division of Economic Development, we did develop just in early 2021, the State Economic Recovery and Expansion Strategy. A lot of that work and the work of the Division of Economic Development is now in implementing that plan. And we've had some very good success in seeing some changes to the way that the state interacts with its partners on an economic development level. And that is sort of fomenting a good deal of support for our collaborative economic development regions, which are really an effort to take all of these things that we do within BEA, including tourism, including helping potentially maybe with the welcome centers, but also primarily with the economic development activity, is to have a much more regional focus on the economic recovery strategies that we have in place, and to be able to implement those in coordination where we have not done that before. So just as a quick example, we have had the sole responsibility for business recruitment in the state at BEA and previously at DRED, with a staff of 2 and sometimes 3 individuals. That can be a heavy load when you're in a time like this where you're seeing continued expansion of activity. We have never really had relationships with local chambers or local economic development organizations or municipalities to assist in the work of recruiting businesses. And that's a big lift. I mean, you got to involve workforce training, you got to involve academic institutions, you got to demonstrate long-term commitments and all these sorts of things. Having a regional partner with those has been huge and a real success story for us. And we're continuing to grow those relationships. And then, of course, as I mentioned, I keep bringing up the housing and broadband because those are 2 areas that are just so central to our economic future. And to have those within BEA and have those leaching through into all of our other strategies and the work that we're doing really increases the meaning and the value that we're able to bring to employers around the state. The very last thing, and then I'll stop talking, is the one of the areas that we have, I wouldn't say struggled, but noticed a need, an increasing need, particularly with the growth of some of these types of activities and the centralization of a lot of administrative components that have historically been done by division, and to try to centralize those into one, a much more efficient way of approaching those, between the federal contracts, between all of the funds and the staffing and the increase in and changes in staffing that we've been having, and chasing workforce as everyone else is really to provide some investment in the administrative side of BEA. When we were established in 2017, we came over from DRED with basically 2 individuals who were tasked with being the entire business office for the department. We have had some changes in that over the last 5 years. Rhonda Hensley has just joined us. She's here, 3 weeks on the job here at BEA. So she's going to be leading that effort, but getting a little bit more investment in that side of the house, I think, is going to help manage a lot of these changes that we have going on internally. So those are really the updates from my standpoint. We're happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. I just really have 2 questions. One sort of is a broader question that relates to revenues, actually. Given the business profits tax is such a huge component of general fund revenues, and if you follow the economics where, we've had near record inflation followed by absolute record interest rate rises, that every time that's happened in the past in the United States, we've had a recession to follow. How well is New Hampshire positioned to handle, say, a moderate recession? And if you could maybe just talk about the basic economy of New Hampshire and how it may have changed from our last recession in 2007, 2008.
Well, there's a lot there. So I would say, first of all, in terms of how we've changed, New Hampshire is definitely on a trajectory right now toward sort of a more high-tech type of economy. We have seen that happening in a multitude of ways. You look at the energy costs, for example, the commercial rates of providing heat or electricity to highly intense manufacturing operations, say like Kitchener Manufacturing in Milford, where they melt steel, and other sort of legacy manufacturing facilities like paper mills in the North Country or in the southwest area of the state. We've seen those operations start to scale down very significantly. Not all of them. I don't want to put Hitchner in that category because they make me have seen a lot of success, but a lot of the heavy industry type of jobs that have been traditionally the center of our manufacturing industry have started to downsize or just go somewhere else. And a lot of that is due to the energy cost, the cost of electricity, not something that is exclusive to New Hampshire. It is something that we see throughout the Northeast. And so while a lot of people say, well, that's doom and gloom about all of that, what they're being replaced with are more advanced manufacturers that have probably in a lot of cases better higher paying positions, higher paying jobs, but have energy use rates that are significantly less. And so they're finding the workforce that they need sort of within this tech basin that really sort of emanates from Massachusetts, but we're increasingly part of. And so we're seeing expansion activity in areas like life science, in areas like just basic technology or advanced manufacturing. And that is a result of the fact that while there are still higher energy costs, that doesn't impact that industry quite so much. But what they're looking for is a highly qualified workforce. And we have that in New Hampshire. We have one of the most highly qualified workforces in the country. We continue to see, record low unemployment rates. We continue to hear from businesses of all type, whether they're a restaurant or whether they're one of these advanced manufacturers, that they have a need for staff. When we look at all of these things, we don't look at them from the standpoint as what's within the political borders of New Hampshire and what do we have to operate with exclusively. We are all jammed in here together up here in the Northeast and New England. So we have a lot of people, we lose some people to Massachusetts in terms of employment, but we also have a large number of people who come to New Hampshire, and that number is increasing. So I would say that's a big change that we've seen over the last 2 years. It's been a trend that was before that, but we're continuing to see that grow. In terms of how well is New Hampshire positioned to be able to handle this, I think that the underlying employer-based private sector types of businesses, our larger employers, are in a good position. I think the more difficult industries right now continue to be healthcare and hospitality. And those are two obviously central components, particularly in rural communities. When you look at the impact of a local small hospital to a town like Littleton or a town like Berlin or the Androscoggin or even Lebanon and Hanover area with Dartmouth Hitchcock, the ability to have those high paying jobs. Yes, you need healthcare, right? You need to be able to provide those services, but these are some of the highest paying jobs in those rural communities. So healthcare is critical. And hospitality, of course. I mean, tourism continues to remain not just the second largest industry in our state. It also is, it's the tip of the spear for everything. And you go around, and I talk to groups all the time, and you say, how many of you are in Hampshire because someone in your background, in your family background, came here on vacation? Right? And you get 2/3 of the room raise their hand, right? So that continues to be a dynamic that we live and die by. So if we have a tourism industry that is not supported and is not able to translate sort of that weekend experience into a long-term open a business, a long-term, join a company in New Hampshire, or even work remotely. People who are working remotely into other areas, not just Boston, but San Francisco and New York. Our third largest tech employer in New Hampshire is Facebook. We don't have a Facebook facility anywhere in New Hampshire, but these are people who are working remotely and they're living in rural communities and they're, participating in their economy there in a good way. And, tie back to broadband there, right? So we need to be able to have those services available from an infrastructure standpoint. So the investments that we've made, the investments that we've been making in terms of in our economic development infrastructure and providing a system that's much more sustainable to support businesses as we go forward is in place, and it's continuing to grow. And we have, I think, a good sense of where we want to make those investments coming forward. But with housing and broadband and some of these other investments that have been made, we're in as good a position as anyone in competition with other states.
Great, thank you. And the second time in a row, I'm going to ask for a line item. See if I can find it here real quick. This one, if you have your budget, it's on, I'm not sure what page it's on, page 5. And it's contracted expenditures, and they go from roughly 3.968 million in 23 up to 11.5 million in 25. I was wondering if you could explain what that was.
Where are we now? Okay.
The jump was so significant that I had to.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the. Right. So I think a good portion of that is some of the changes that we have made, and I'd have to look at some of the other accounting units to be sure, but we've made some changes in our Office of Workforce Opportunity and the way that that's funded. And the way that we interact with New Hampshire Employment Security. So there's been some update in who is administering those programs. So I think that's the bulk of it. I think that in addition, we have a request under, I believe, the Division of Economic Development for some increase in contractual assistance going forward, and that will be to continue to help us implement strategies as it relates to the economic recovery and expansion strategy. So I don't have the exact answer as to what that is. We can provide that for you, but I do believe that it's related to our Office of Workforce Opportunity changes and then some of the requests that we've made for the Division of Economic Development.
Great, thank you so much.
I just have more of a, it's a general question. I believe it was yesterday, the university system was talking about one of the programs that they are running and they're looking to expand is building partnerships with students and private businesses in terms of internships, trying to keep students in New Hampshire. And because you have such a connection with businesses, especially new ones coming in, Do they work directly with your office? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, very closely, we work with the university system and each of the individual universities on exactly that subject. I just did Plymouth State yesterday. So I refer to it as the triangle. It is definitely part of our major strategic approach to grow that qualified workforce.
Okay.
You know, the triangle being the state, our academic institutions, and employers. And one of our strategies to really to normalize that relationship, so it's not just like, hey, we need a few interns. Let's call Jim over at UNH and get a few. We want to normalize those relationships so it's a much better relationship, and that we're seeing some success there.
Yeah, one of their additional requests was in the Plymouth and Keene area was to try to build the program. Okay. No, that's great. Thank you.
Yep.
Good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Environmental Services for their testimony. Good morning.
Good morning. Again, for the record, my name is Bob Scott. I'm Commissioner with the Department of Environmental Services. And thankfully for you, I brought the brains of our outfit, Sue Carlson, our Chief Operating Officer. So as you'll see in the handout that's coming your way, the department has a fairly wide and diverse set of responsibilities, and notionally we're divided under really three divisions, and then we internally really consider the Commissioner's Office a division also. And I'll highlight some of the programs that we do, but I'll start with in addition to Hazen Drive, we have an office at Pease. What many people may not be aware of is we do have a small fleet of watercraft that we and booming material that we operate around Great Bay, especially as an oil spill response mechanism. We have a coastal program there, and we'll talk a little bit later about our shellfish program. So we have a shellfish monitoring program that budding industry really relies on. Also in Franklin and Laconia, we have the Winnipesaukee River Basin, which is, I think we're unique in the country for such an agency as ours, that we own and operate a wastewater treatment facility that serves 10 communities in the Lakes region. So that's rather unique in that respect. We also are responsible for the safety of the 2,615 dams in the state. 274 of those are state-owned, and they're in various levels of, I was going to say disrepair, but I don't want to be too alarmist, but there's a constant need to maintain dams and other infrastructure. Similarly, another program that may not be obvious that the department would have is the Pools and Spa program, and we'll talk about a position later for that. And back in 2018, into the first year of my tenure as commissioner, we unfortunately had in Hampton, we had an unregistered spa cause Legionella issue that impacted 15 people in Hampton, including a couple of deaths. So that really was the impetus to have us revamp that program. So we'll talk about that when we get to prioritize needs. In addition to our bread and butter, hazardous waste and water resource issues, air issues, air pollution issues, we are also, again, maybe not as obvious to folks, a big part of our annual budget is usually different loans and grant programs that go out to the community. So I've been commissioner since 2017. We did a quick back of the envelope. During that time frame, over $800 million has gone to local communities for water and wastewater infrastructure, and they're really dependent on that. So that's a large, that kind of pass-through is a large part of our budget, but it's also an important part of our workload. So those are not just, here's a lump sum, go do with it what you want. They all have federal and state requirements, obviously, for auditing. And by and large, they're done on a reimbursement basis. So we validate that the engineering work has been done properly and it's a valid request to be paid that meets the criteria. So as you may, and those are 20-year loans by and large, so for the loans. So as you may imagine, those are the gift that keeps on giving, so to speak, as far as workload. Having said that, they're vital to the communities, and we view that as an important part of our mission. Before I leave this slide number 2, you see we have a total of 478 full-time employees. Currently, we have a 61%, hopefully not percent, 61 vacancies. That's roughly 13%. I'd just go home if that was the case. So again, so we have engineers and scientists, and if we go to the next slide, I'll continue on that theme. We do have a great mission, which is protecting public health and the environment. And I think that's why we only have the 13% vacancy rate, because to be blunt, we're trying to compete with industry for the engineers and scientists that are out there. A lot of people come because of the mission, so we're thankful for that. So going to slide 4, again, some of the core functions I've kind of mentioned already, so I won't labor on that. But again, things that have taken up a lot of time of late are emerging contaminants in water. The good news, by and large, I think the environment has gotten cleaner due to a lot of activities in the past decades. The bad news, I suppose, is as science gets better, we're finding that in even more minute levels that there are contaminants that we weren't aware of that are causing health issues. So the goalpost, if you will, for the agency and public health keeps moving and due to science changing, but that's, I think, inevitable. Moving to slide 5, again, as I kind of alluded, so the contamination's a large part of addressing that. We've been very active in that. I've already mentioned we do a lot of work on infrastructure, drinking water, clean water, dams, stormwater, and part of that is all data management to make us more efficient. So annually, on average, we do about 21,000 permit actions and conduct over 16,000 inspections with 93 different type of permits, managing over 115 federal grants and more than 40 dedicated funds, and in excess of 35 state laws. I will say, parenthetically, it seems our responsibility and mission grows with every legislative session since I've been here. We typically go in for looking for ways to streamline, and this is not, again, I think it's more the goalpost thing I was just talking about, but every year the legislature gives us more responsibility. So that's another area where the goalpost keeps moving for us. But again, I think it's probably necessary. But having all those actions I just talked about, that makes data management even more important for us. And again, you'll see that in our efficiency budget. Moving to slide number 6. Again, our efficiency budget is roughly $271 million, so that's obviously within the 3% goal. It does represent an 8% increase over the fiscal year 23, primarily in the area, again, of contracts and loans. I'll talk more about that. We also, within that, we have 14 new staff broken up in areas of programmatic work, administrative work, and technical staff. So what are we talking about? I mentioned our pools and spas program already. So we're looking at adding a position due to the new requirements that, again, were put forth after that event in 2018. We have solid program staff for solid waste, emerging contaminants, asbestos, and our state revolving loan fund programs. They're all related in some fashion to ongoing increases in federal funding and in response to our contaminant issues, our emerging contaminants. related to that, I already mentioned the importance of data management. So the technical staff reference it was shorthand for our business systems analysts. So we have different analysts in our budget to help us at different levels within the agency. And again, so far that's proven. We already have some embedded in our. Obviously, work very closely with DOIT, but we have some embedded within our own programs to help facilitate DOIT's work with us, and that's really paid dividends. So that's why we think we need to continue for that. So moving to the next slide, slide 7 is again, Sue Carlson was kind enough to kind of give you a couple variations to give you an idea of where our budget lies. Really, the take home, at least in my mind, of this is we're primarily funded out of between fees and the infrastructure different funds. That's 94% of our funding. Only 6% of our total budget is in general funds. So, moving fairly quickly for you. Obviously, you can answer any questions. I recognize we're the last on the list here, so I know you saved the best for last. So the next slide, again, is just breaking it out a little bit different. And again, you see the different loan programs especially are a big part of what we do, whether it's, I already mentioned water infrastructure, we do brownfields. We also, again, the PFAS, emerging contaminated issue is also a lot of what we do. So that's 68% of our budget is passed through to the local communities. So moving to the next slide, number 9. Again, just a different breakout that Sue's provided for us. Again, this is by division. By and large, you'll see the water division accounts for roughly 50% of our operating budget. I already mentioned those pass-throughs. Those major programs are all in our water division. And they also, probably not surprisingly, account for 53% of our staffing as well, followed by the waste management division and air division, and then the commissioner's office. So our next slide is analysis by cost category. So, this is, again, our efficiency budget, and I do want to focus a bit on our prioritized needs. As you can see, there's an overall increase of over 19 million from 23 to 24. Nearly all the increases, again, is in loans and contracts. 10 million of that is in our clean water. When we say clean water, it's really jargon for the environmentally folks. So clean water you would think is something you would drink. It's actually wastewater. So drinking water is something you should drink. So clean water repayments are showing at $10 million. So why is that? So I'll talk about for our prioritized needs. The infrastructure bill that Congress did is funneling a lot of money. I mentioned the $800 million that since 2017 we've used. That's mostly state revolving loan funds. Those funds are increasing significantly under the infrastructure bill. So over the next 5 years, we're getting a big increase in those amounts, which is very exciting. On top of that, the ARPA money, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, there was a carve-out in ARPA allowing those funds that went to at least the state government to be used for water and wastewater infrastructure as well. So we've been very fortunate as a state because I think because the way we were set up and we already had a surplus going into the pandemic, we were able to, and I'm thankful for it, move $185 million of ARPA funds to address drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, and dams, much needed infrastructure work. We took that money and we leveraged that against the traditional state revolving funds, and we were able to front load a fair amount of work that's now going through. So that increase is really a recognition of let's get that money out, let's leverage what we have, and we have this infrastructure money coming on top of that. So again, it's a great opportunity for the state, and I almost work every day with municipalities to make sure that they get their story out so they can accept this monies at town meeting, because that's part of what many of them have to do. Having said that, federal loans also were increased by $1 million for the drinking water side of the SRF from 23 to 24. You'll show a decrease in loans for the Emerging Contaminant Fund, which is our PFAS loan fund. A couple bienniums ago, we were allocated bond approval for up to $50 million for PFAS loans to address contamination in the state for drinking water. The reason why that's showing a decrease is because we're coming up to that loan cap of $50 million, so we aren't able to do as much as we had done in past years. We're also seeing a contract increase, primarily in our federal Superfund program. Let's see, that's $6.6 million of federal funds that we're able to allocate. And the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund, which came through the legislature after MTBE monies from contamination came to the state. There's an increase for contract work for $1.6 million for analytical work to help those impacted wells and communities. And finally, for salaries and benefits for 25, I assume you'll see this pretty much across the board. Those increases are a result of the step increases and increases in health benefit premiums. Page 11 is again is an analysis showing our efficiency budget by category. And again, you'll see increases in, as I just mentioned, in federal funds, primarily due to the Superfund contract funding. You'll see increases, again, the $10 million I mentioned for SRF repayment loans, and the 1.6 for drinking water trust fund for analyticals, as I mentioned. So really what I wanted to talk about after all that was the prioritized needs. So again, as I alluded to, for the federal infrastructure bill, that much of that was focused on water infrastructure generally. So we're seeing quite a plus up, and so a lot of what you're seeing is related to that. But generally, and I'll go through each one real quickly, is we are asking for a new position for database work to help us, as I mentioned, for that critical work. State aid grant increase for the wastewater program. I'll talk to that. That is not SRF. That's a state program that the legislature likes to fund. And then we'll talk about additional increase for the Winnipesaukee River Basin, as I mentioned, and for federal funds, the infrastructure money that I've mentioned. So moving to slide 13, ranked by our priorities is our prioritized needs. So again, the first, as I mentioned, is our new business systems analyst to help with our database work. So our constituents are very used to and dependent and demanding now that we have an online presence that they can get at environmental data, permitting information online. That's a trend that's not going away. And our public-facing side of that, we call it the one-stop. The intent is that here's your one-stop to find your information. That's been an ongoing evolution over decades, and that's a continuous thing that needs upgrading and improving. So we need help on that. We also are found that we work very closely with the Environmental Bureau at the Department of Justice, and we want to fund a new position over there. So you'll see an increase based on that. And again, that's a lot of that's due to activity. For an example, as I mentioned, PFAS. We're in litigation federally with 3M, the manufacturers of that, the firefighting foam folks. Those are just examples, but those are additional things that the Department of Justice attorneys never had to address before, and they need that time and staffing to do that. On the positive side, for PCBs, they were able to get a $25 million settlement in the state. Went to the general fund with Monsanto. So that's the type of work they've been doing, but they need the staff to do that, and we want to help increase that. The state air permit program, our third prioritized needs. We are I'll say a couple things. So that's a fee program, but especially as the economy we think we're about to go into, we're loath to increase fees. Most states augment with general funds. This is, and historically in the past bienniums, at least since I've been here, the state has been doing that. So this is intended to offset what would otherwise be an increase to mission-based fees for that program. Priority needs number 4 is we have, under statute, we have what's called an in-stream flow program for rivers. That requires certain studies to be done, and the intent of that is and it's not, it's probably very timely. We're probably likely, unfortunately, next year to go into year 4 of severe drought in different parts of the state. So the intent of that program is to manage the use and impacts of water usage in our rivers. So this would allow us to meet the statute, but also to do it in a more timely manner. I think at the current rate, we'll maybe get through all the rivers in 40 years or so, which is, I don't think, really the intent of the legislation. The 5th prioritized need is, I mentioned briefly, our shellfish program. So we were able to purchase new monitoring buoys for water quality for Great Bay. Data sans, Sue always wants me to say that. She likes the word. So the good news is we're able to do that, but we also need, they require periodic maintenance, and we need to budget for that. Otherwise, we'll have lost that money that was so badly needed. And again, the program is very successful, and that industry is very appreciative of the program, and should you need, I'm sure I can get you a lot of letters of support for that. Prioritized need number 6 is regarding stream gauges. So historically, DES and Department of Transportation use information out of 27 stream gauges that are maintained by the federal USGS, and we have a longstanding MOU that we do a cost share with DOT. This biennium, the USGS has raised the cost by roughly 6%. So this represents, out of the highway fund, the DOT share that cost. And again, those are important certainly to us, again, because we manage, I mentioned, all those dams, and knowing the flooding that's happening and what's going on with the rivers and the water bodies feeding those dams is very important to proper management. Item 8 for our prioritized needs. Oh, did I miss 7? Oh, thank you. Sorry, Mike. I have my division director in the background scowling at me. Is for solid waste. We have 2 unlined landfills that there are no responsible parties for that need in order to keep them safe and not impactful to the communities, that we need to fund contracts to do at least basic monitoring and maintenance for those 2 landfills. One's in Danbury and one's in Berlin. So that's item 7. Item 8, so I go to that now, is for, I mentioned our Winnipesaukee River Basin. So that is an increase in cost for them. Again, this is 100% funded by the 10 member communities. We've been communicating with them regularly, so this is not a surprise to them. But probably no surprise, these type of activities, moving water is a very energy intensive endeavor, and is probably not lost on anybody, but energy costs are going up quite a bit. Cost of chemicals and parts. So we have a program for that, the wastewater treatment facility, to do upgrades, that type of thing. You'll see a lot of debt service in the efficiency budget for this program, but there's only so much maintenance that can be, upgrades can be done. So what happens is now we need to, obviously, until you do the upgrades, the maintenance actually tends to increase, and the cost of those parts are reflected in this also. So again, that's what that is for number 8. Item number 9 is, I mentioned, the over 270 state-owned dams. We're responsible for maintenance. One issue is you can't have too much growth on the grass and whatnot, so it could cause erosion into the dams. So we're asking for a slope mower, which is a special mower for the side slopes of the dams to allow us to more efficiently address that. Item 10 is for state aid grants. So state aid grants is typically for wastewater facilities. It's a state program, longstanding. It's an after-the-fact program that the legislature, again, continues to fund. That a facility is done, they submit to us, and it's on the order of 20%, that the state then gives them after the fact for having done that work. So this is not for, number 10 is not for any new work or any new grants being added to that list. This is to serve the projects that have already gone through the JNC process, Executive Council, and been approved, where we feel we have an obligation to fund those. So that's item number 10. Prioritized need number 11 is for DOIT. And again, it's primarily for software increases. And as you probably, again, heard from everybody, even the Microsoft products we use have, there's a price to be had for those. Similarly, for item number 12 is Department of Administrative Services. So Director Gary, you can ask Commissioner Rockwell. So that's their portion of our costs, including mostly related to workman comp expenses. So then moving to slide 16 is we talked about the bipartisan infrastructure law, or the infrastructure bill, as I call it. These are related to funding increases from those. So these, again, are very impactful for the communities, very important to fund, but that also does increase our budget and show a need to increase our budget. So these are, by and large, programs all through this page that you'll see over the next 5 years for the most part. And they range from the drinking water, clean water, and then again, the number 17 is for emerging contaminants. So it doesn't, PFAS, for those who have heard that word, is that 4-letter word is the one that gets the press a lot, but there are other emerging contaminants that can fall under this. And again, that goes under the aspect I was talking about earlier. As the science changes, we're finding more things to address. So I suppose the good news on that is Congress has allocated, we haven't actually received the money yet, but we expect on the order of $10 million per year for emerging contaminants. So almost done with our prioritized needs. So we have a lot of needs, all I can say. Is under page 17, prioritized need number 18 is, again, through the infrastructure bill. We received extra monies for our dam safety program to assist with dam inspections. Again, not only for our 274 dams in the state, but the over 2,600 dams in the state in training. So that's very impactful monies. We're happy to hopefully be able to accept that. Prioritized need 19 is for brownfields. So this is monies that have come to the agency for site assessments for mostly underserved communities to help communities redevelop those sites. So item number 20 is our coastal resiliency program. And this is monies to help with coastal projects. I'll give you an example with culvert replacements, for instance. So if you have an undersized culvert going under a road and there's a storm, the impacts of that typically at the end of the day, if it's a big enough storm, will be to erode around the culvert and take the road out. So we'd like to avoid that. So in the future, we would like larger culverts to be sized for that. So that's the type of work that item number 20 is for, and item 21 is, again, for combined sewer overflows and stormwater. Those are grants to the communities as well. A lot of work to be done there. This last slide is Sue is kind enough again to kind of characterize where our prioritized needs goes under. And you'll see by and large, certainly the largest chunk is the federal funds, the infrastructure bill money, as I talked about. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, being the last one of the 3 days, I'm curious how many questions I'll actually get, but I'm sure you'll entertain me too.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I thank you and you, Sue, for helping us along the way over the last few months with all your meetings. So hopefully our questions can be kept to a minimal. But one of the things I want to touch on is PFAS, given it's the publicity it's gotten and the money that's gone into it. And I don't know if you have this figure now, but I was wondering if you could, if you did, the total amount of money that has been spent to date on the PFAS program since maybe going through the last budget. So from fiscal year through fiscal year 22 and then into fiscal year 23. And this would include not only general funds, but federal money as too, including ARPA. And so that's the first part of the question. And then my next part of that is, what have we gotten for that money? Meaning, is there a way to quantify how much of the problem has been fixed and how much is remaining, and what sort of the timeline is to eradicate, if that's even possible, the PFAS problem in New Hampshire?
So I can maybe pick at the last question, part of the question first. So not that you'd want to, but if you look at a map of sampling, which we do have nationally, New Hampshire is very unique in that the whole state is represented. So we've done a great job of sampling. We were able to use Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund money in 2017 to help fund that initiative, among other things. So we're better positioned than most states as far as we've done a lot of testing. That doesn't mean every well in the state's been tested, but we have a better feel than most of where the contamination is. I talk about moving goalposts. So we have a state drinking water standard. We have one of the programs I didn't mention in our structures. We actually have an environmental health program. So we have a toxicologist, and we work with Health and Human Services, and we set drinking water standards. We have a drinking water standard for PFAS. EPA, with the current administration, is looking at doing their own standard, which potentially could be an order of magnitude even lower. I don't think so, but that's still in play. So that's another area where the goalposts may move, by the way. So if obviously there's a federal standard and it's more stringent than what we're doing, everybody will have to comply with that, and rightly so. So having said that, what we have done is, where we were aware of contamination issues, we're being able to use the funds. So off the top of my head, we talked already about the $50 million loan program. This last session, we received $25 million in state surplus to address PFAS issues. I don't remember the number, if it's 5 or 15 million, I guess probably 5, out of the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund. So what we've been able to, and then again, we're about to receive at least 10 million a year from the federal monies on that. So far to date, we haven't had any federal money directly. Having said that, for PFAS, yes, thank you. Well, that's the 20. Yeah, that's true. And then another 25 million in ARPA money. That's right. On top of that, so I don't consider that federal money because it was up to the state's discretion on where to put it. So if you don't consider the ARPA money or federal money, we haven't received any federal money toward this yet, with the exception of the state revolving loan funds do qualify, right? So if you're a drinking water system, you're impacted, you could get a loan with a certain amount of loan forgiveness based on that. And now we're about to get at least $10 million a year. So having said all that, I think the needs still probably outstrip the amount, but we've been fairly well positioned compared to other states in that we've leaned ahead, so we know what the problem is. It's already characterized, and we've already started spending monies to address it. A lot of states haven't been in that place yet. And so for programs, the other things I wanted to highlight is not only have we been able to address for the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund or other funds, systems that have been impacted and provided assistance. We also unique in that we're able to use some of these funds to address private drinking water wells. So we have a statewide program for PFAS where if your well's been contaminated, you can. It's a reimbursement program. Again, we just don't give money and hope it's the right amount and that people pocket it. It's a grant program of up to $5,000 for each individual well to put treatment on that well. Having said that, since really our preferred outcome is that you connect to a public water system, then if you're close enough to a public water system, that program will give you up to $10,000 to connect to that public water system. So that's available statewide. It's in play right now. Every day there's work going on in that. So again, I'm not saying we've beat the PFAS issue, but I think you'll find we are probably better positioned than I would argue any other state right now. So
Great. Thank you very much.
This is just a follow-up on the prioritized need regarding the state aid grants, the wastewater, one of the largest chunks of general funds. I think Sue, you had mentioned that these projects have already been, or when have already been completed and already approved through GNC.
Yes.
So are these entities then, already counting on this money coming to them? Is there a timeline that they expect that money to come to them? How does that work with the arrangement?
The way the state aid grant program works is we essentially pay 20% of their debt service payments. So we pay them in time to their debt service payments. Okay. So if the city of Manchester is making debt service payments in October and April, we will make payments to them in October and April.
So if that is not funded, that impact is that they would be responsible for
Yes.
finding that, okay. And then in the efficiency budget along the same lines, is the efficiency budget based on, for the state aid program, based on anticipated contracts coming forward or projects coming forward, or are those also projects that have already been approved for the state aid program?
Well, we were in a unique situation for 22-23 where in the governor's budget, this accounting unit was fully funded for existing programs. During the legislative phase, this funding was removed from the operating budget and given back to us as part of HB2 from surplus from prior years. So it doesn't show, if you were to look actually in our operating budget, you would see for water, we're showing a zero budget. Let me tell you what the page is. Page 61. You would see for 23, you would see a zero budget number here. In the meantime, we have been granted through other legislation an additional $12 million to make new awards. So we are in the process during 22 and 23, actually 23 and 24, we are making new grant awards, and that increase is reflected for the ongoing payments in our request for 24 and 25.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the governor's budget hearings. One last note, Commissioner Arlinghouse, if you're watching, I hope you feel better. The governor's budget hearing is now adjourned.